So this is the Asus Zen IO Pro, a 4K all-in-one beast that comes with a brand new Intel Skylake i7-6700T processor, the NVIDIA GTX 960M GPU, 16GB of RAM, and it also comes with a 4K display, IPS panel that's also a touchscreen. So hey everyone, and welcome to the Zen Tech. I'm Daniel, and as most of you already know, I'm already using an all-in-one computer as my daily driver. So say this 5K Retina iMac, this is an all-in-one computer, and this is also my daily driver. And having an all-in-one computer is just great. You only have the display, and all the components are inside the display. The CPU, the GPU, obviously the motherboard, everything is inside the display casing, so it doesn't take up too much space, and at the same time, it simply looks awesome. And the iMac is definitely the most popular all-in-one computer, but what if you want something else, something that's not an iMac? Well, this is my review of the new Asus 4K all-in-one beast. This is the new Asus Zen IO Pro, and this is my full in-depth review. Let's see how this beast stacks up. Enjoy. So in terms of the design, the back looks insane. It's made out of this polished metal, which just looks stunning, really premium and really high quality. And then in terms of the ports, we get a lot of them. So we get an SD card slot, a microphone, and a separate headphone jack, which is really useful, by the way, when compared to some other all-in-one computers that just combine those two. The iMac. We then get an Ethernet port, Kensington lock, 2 HDMI out ports, so that you can connect 2 external monitors to this. And by the way, these ports are HDMI 2.0 ports, so 4K at 60 frames per second is indeed possible. There's no HDMI in port, so you cannot use this as a monitor, by the way. But then we also get 4 USB 3.0 ports, 1 USB 2.0 port for connecting receivers, and then we also get a USB Type-C port, which also supports the brand new USB 3.1 standard. Now, unfortunately, it doesn't come with a display port, meaning that if you really want to connect a 5K monitor to this, well, you won't be able to do it. However, it does have USB 3.1. In case you don't know, USB 3.1 does support 5K, meaning that as soon as we get any 5K monitors that have a USB 3.1 connection, well, you'll be able to connect those monitors via Asus Zen IO Pro. So port-wise, it's looking pretty good so far. Okay, now take a look at the front. The design's okay. It's not amazing. You get some pretty thick bezels on the sides and bottoms. That's okay, since the speakers on this thing are really loud and they do pack a lot of bass. On the top we get a set of dual microphones, and take a look at this. 3 front-facing cameras? Well, no, not really. Those 2 extra ones are actually depth sensors because this is the new Intel RealSense technology. So this thing can recognize and track your face and also measure the depth, so you can use this for logging in with just your face. You can also take some pretty cool 3D photos, and then you can also play with some really awesome apps. There's not a lot of apps that you can play with at the moment, but more of them will come in the future. Okay, so far so good. Let's move on to the display. So in terms of the display, this is a 24-inch 4K IPS panel with excellent color reproduction, and I believe this is sRGB 103%, which is really impressive. So in case you want to do any photo editing or color correction on this thing, it's pretty good for that. The only not so impressive thing when it comes to the display, well, you can probably tell this from the video, this thing is basically, especially when viewing darker images, this thing reflects everything. It's so reflective, it's way too reflective, and by the way, I've never seen a display more reflective than this. And it's so reflective that if you're watching a movie at daytime with some darker scenes, well, all you'll be able to see is yourself, because this is a thing. So why is that? Why is this display so reflective? Well, interesting enough, the display itself is actually not glossy at all. It actually has a matte coating, which means that, well, if you've ever seen a glossy 4K display versus a matte 4K display, well, the glossy one looks a billion times more sharper. Well, not a billion times, but definitely much sharper. That's because there's no anti-reflective coating the display. But this one is actually a touchscreen, so the touch panel, that's the one being so reflective. So yes, it does support multi-touch with up to 10 fingers. So if you have more than 10 fingers, you will use it, just joking. So 24-inch 4K touch display sounds awesome, but the question is, do you actually need a touch display on a desktop computer? And no, the answer is no, you don't. Working with a keyboard and mouse is much quicker than just using your finger to scroll or resize things. And besides, using a touchscreen on a vertical panel results in a lot of arm strain, so it's good that you have the option to for when, well, I don't know, for when you want to use this as a 24-inch tablet, which is probably never. So honestly, Asus should have invested that money in maybe upgrading that 5400 RPM hard drive, which is just insanely slow. I'll get to that in a second, but yeah, hence it's slower than, I don't know, it's slow. But speaking of things that are not so slow, the performance. So the Asus Zen Pro comes with a brand new Intel Skylake 6700T processor, not to be confused with the 6700K, which is Skylake's flagship by the way. This is a much more mobile version, so to say, of the 6700K. It's still a quad-core i7 chip, but it runs cooler, it also consumes much less power, and also comes with a much lower 2.8 GHz clock speed, which can turbo boost to up to 3.6 GHz rather than 4.2 like we have with the 6700K. Now, in terms of the actual benchmarks, running Geekbench in 32-bit mode resulted in a 3632 single-core score and a multi-core score of over 14,000, which is not that bad. Now, there was a pretty big difference between this and the 6700K, which also in 32-bit mode managed to achieve a single-core score of 4600 and a multi-core score of over 17,000, which is really impressive. But still, overall, the 6700T is still a pretty capable CPU. In terms of the GPU, we get an NVIDIA GTX 960M, which comes with 4 GB of dedicated video memory, and we also get 16 GB of RAM. So in terms of the actual performance, well, we're doing pretty well so far. The GTX 960M GPU plus that 6700T processor plus the 16 GB of RAM, well, all of these let you edit 4K videos really smoothly in Adobe Premiere. Adobe After Effects also works really well as well. Okay, so what about gaming on this thing? So I tested a couple of games. The first one was Batman Arkham City, not Arkham Knight. Arkham City because, yeah, I know this is not a very demanding game, but at the same time, it does have an included benchmarking tool, which is really useful. So I tested this with everything on extreme, at 1080p resolution, and I managed to achieve 38 frames per second as the minimum frame rate, 62 as the maximum one, and 56 as the average one, which is pretty impressive overall. Next up, I tested out StarCraft 2 at 1080p resolution, everything on extreme, so all the settings were maxed out. I managed to achieve a frame rate of 90, 95, really close to 100 frames per second, which was really impressive. So then I decided to bump the resolution to full 4K. Again, everything was on extreme. And this time we got about 35 frames per second. Obviously the frame rate will go down once you start having more units on the screen, but still, this was really impressive. GTX 960M is a pretty capable graphics card. I also tested out Hearthstone at 4K resolution, high settings, and we managed to achieve a frame rate of 40, 60 frames per second, which again was really impressive, although I did see some occasional frame drop, but nothing too severe. And now in terms of some actual standalone GPU benchmarks, I tested out Cinebench and Unigen's Heaven benchmark, which is one of the most demanding benchmarks that you can get for your GPU. And with Cinebench, it managed to achieve a frame rate of 95.5 frames per second. This is an OpenGL and a 671 CPU score. Really impressive, especially that GPU score. And now onto the most demanding GPU test that you can do, Heaven benchmark. So I ran this on extreme, so everything was maxed out, anti-aliasing was also maxed out, and I ran this at 1600 by 900, and we got 25 frames per second, which is actually not that bad considering how demanding this test is. So the GPU performance, the CPU performance, the performance overall is here. So whether you want to use this as an editing machine or even as a gaming machine, again, 4K gaming is not actually possible at 60 frames per second, at least not with the more demanding games. But 1080p at 60 frames per second is definitely possible even with the more modern ones. So far so good. The performance is pretty good, but the main downside of this machine is that hard drive. So this thing comes with a 1TB 5400 RPM hard drive. 5400 RPM hard drive in 2016. Not PCIe flash storage, not even SATA-based SSD, not even a 7200 RPM hard drive, but a 5400 RPM. I mean, in case you don't know, there's literally no other desktop storage slower than a 5400 RPM hard drive. And coming from a 2 GB per second flash storage to a less than 100 MB per second hard drive, well, I mean, take a look at how long it takes to load the app. Waiting, still waiting, and after about 4 to 5 minutes, it's usable. This thing is so slow that when I was downloading the benchmarking game from the Steam app, the thing that was slowing down the download was not actually my internet connection, but my hard drive. It's so slow that it can easily get to 100% usage in no time, and yeah, trying to install a 1 GB app took me more than 10 minutes, seriously? Sometimes the usage was at 100%, but the write speed was less than a megabyte per second, so I don't know, but a 5400 RPM hard drive, especially in 2016, especially in an all-in-one computer, which by the way means it's an all-in-one computer, you won't be able to replace the hard drive, you won't be able to put an SSD in, and speaking of upgradable things, you won't be able to replace the RAM either. So nothing is upgradable in the Asus Zen Pro. and having such a slow storage means that everything will be incredibly slow. So all the uploading, constant freezing, and yeah, this will actually happen a lot, especially if you're stressing the hard drive too much. I mean, I literally wasn't doing anything, and yeah, the usage was still at 100%. Importing 4K footage into Premiere, well, I'm not even gonna talk about how slow it is. I'm just not going to go that far and say that it's unusable, because it's usable. You just have to wait much longer. But again, coming from a 2 GB per second flash storage definitely doesn't help at all. Okay, so overall, what do I personally think about the Asus Zen IO Pro? Well, I honestly think it's a pretty good attempt from Asus when it comes to all-in-one desktop computers. The design's really good and feels really premium overall. You also have a great display that's really sharp, and you also have some really good color reproduction and really good viewing angles, since this is an IPS display, even though the reflectiveness of the display makes it really tough to be used for photo or video editing in daylight. Intel's RealSense technology is a pretty awesome addition. And then in terms of the performance is actually really good. You have that really powerful Skylake i7 6700T processor, 16 GB of RAM, and the NVIDIA GTX 960. So the performance is good. That's if you don't take the 5400 RPM hard drive into consideration, which by the way is a tech crime in 2016. Now one more thing to point out, I haven't said a word about the accessories yet. So you do get a wireless mouse and a keyboard, but these accessories are honestly one of the cheapest ones I've seen. I mean, the keyboard looks like it was made in 2005, not 2016. Yes, it looks like it was made out of aluminum, but no, this is plastic. And the same goes for the mouse. Nothing too special. It looks like, you know, those 10-pound mice that you can buy from, I don't know, a Chinese shop. Hopefully you do have a spare one with you. And yes, you also need AA batteries for these, because they don't come with any integrated batteries at all. Other than that, I haven't said anything about a price yet. So in terms of the price, this is £1,500 or just about $2,200, which is okay. It's decent, considering the fact that you do get a 4K IPS panel, 24 inches. That's also a touchscreen, 16 GB of RAM, the NVIDIA 960M with 4 GB of dedicated video memory, and yeah, don't forget about that M there in the 960M. This is the mobile version, and also that Intel Skylake 6700T. So overall, it's not that bad of a deal. Now, just for comparison, a 1,500-pound iMac only gets you 8 GB of RAM, quad-core i5 processor, which is still Skylake, and interesting enough, this one actually has a higher base clock than the 6700T, but at the same time, it doesn't support hyper-threading. The GPU on the iMac is much worse, but at the same time, you do get a much better design, a much better display. That's also a 5K display, 27 inches, so it's also a much larger display. It's also a DCI P3 display, so much wider color gamut and accuracy, not even to mention an actual premium keyboard or a mouse or a trackpad, depending on which one you choose. And you also get a 1TB 7200 RPM hard drive, which you can actually upgrade to a Fusion drive, which combines flash storage with a regular hard drive for just £80 more, and that would make a massive difference. Or you could upgrade that for the same price to a 256GB PCIe based flash storage, and comparing that to Asus's only offering of a 5400 RPM hard drive that's not upgradable at all, well, there is. So overall, compared to the iMac, on which you can also install Windows by the way, you do get a much better processor on the Asus Zen IO Pro, a much better GPU, double the amount of RAM from 8GB to 16GB, but honestly, if it weren't for that really slow hard drive, and those really cheaply made accessories, and that really reflective display, I would actually call this a deal breaker. But at the moment, it's not. That's unless you're willing to live with a 5400 RPM hard drive that's not upgradable or replaceable. Now, there's actually a workaround for this, by the way. You could essentially install Windows 10 on an external SSD and boot it off an SSD, and obviously connect that via USB 3.1 or USB 3.0. So you could do that, but I mean, you could do it, but let me know what do you guys think about the Asus Zen IO Pro in the comment section down below. What do you guys think about Asus's 4K all-in-one desktop computer? Again, I honestly think that this is a pretty good attempt from Asus, but then there are 3 things that Asus really needs to fix: the reflectiveness of the display, that really slow hard drive, and those accessories. And once those 3 things are fixed, we'll have an amazing 4K all-in-one desktop computer. Hopefully the next model will fix this. But until then, this was my full in-depth review of the new 4K Asus Zen IO Pro. Feel free to give this video a huge like if you have enjoyed it. This one took a pretty long time to make, quite a few days actually, so yeah, every like is triple appreciated. Let me know in the comment section down below if you've made it to the end of this video by saying I've made it to the end of this